I'm pleased that we've had an opportunity to continue our discussion with the following representatives from the Residential Tenancies Board: Owen Keegan, Chairperson; Rosemary Steen, Director; Louise Loughlin, Deputy Director; and Brian Galway, Senior Research and Policy Manager. The opening statements have been issued to members. I propose that we would publish those statements and take them as read. Agreed? All right. Now we'll move on to questions to members. And just to let members know, I'm trying to judge who's coming in and out, and some people aren't turning, and so that's why I'm trying to keep the minutes down, and I'll get people back in afterwards if I can. So apologies on that. So I'd ask just direct the questions and try and keep it tight as usual. We'll go with three minutes per member, and we'll try and get people back in. As I say, if we had apologies, we know who's not coming in, and we'd be able to. So first slot, Fianna Fáil slot, and that's Deputy Seamus McGrath.
Thanks very much, Cahir. Look, thank you to everybody for coming in today. I suppose, can I just go straight to some questions? Our time is tight, but as a public representative, I suppose one of the issues that's constantly raised with us in relation to the RTB would involve the delays that it takes in terms of resolving complaints or disputes, whether it be on the landlord side or the tenant side. Can I just ask where you see things now in terms of your timeline for dealing with disputes? Do you see that timeline coming down? Can I also ask you in terms of your resources? It has been said that additional resources are being made available. Can I ask you to comment on that? And I suppose if I have a chance, just want to ask in relation to third-party complaints, if I can ask a question on that. But I suppose first of all, just to focus in relation to your ability to deal with disputes and complaints and the delays that are often involved, and resources, that whole issue, if I could get you to comment on those two. Thank you.
Well, Chair, first one related to disputes. Very happy to say that we did get extra resources in 2024, significant number of additional staff, and that's brought our resource, our dispute handling time down to the agreed KPI with the department, and I can give you more information on that. We're constantly in negotiation with the department on the issue of resources. It's in a very dynamic environment. As the regulatory environment changes, we make our case to the department, and the department has been very supportive, and we're in discussions with the department at the moment because there are major changes which are imminent, and we put in a case for additional resources. There'll be significant fallout from that. So we're in that process. So just in terms of complaints, I think we're very satisfied. There's been a very significant reduction in complaints in relation to our service. So we can give you more details on that now. Deputy, I might ask our Director to...
Yeah. I'm happy to give some more details there, if that's okay, Chair. Yeah. So just thanks to the investment which the Chair has mentioned, we processed 11,047 dispute cases in 2024. And then 5,290 adjudication and mediation hearings were held. That was up 34% on 2023. We held 1,302 tribunal hearings, which was up 74% on 2023, so really significant jump in the number being processed there. And we issued 4,207 determination orders, which would have been up 41% on 2023. So while we do accept absolutely that there were issues, we've worked very hard as a team to resolve them, and the average time to process a mediation case was 7 weeks for the applications received and processed in 2024. If I could just say as well, we have now digitised that whole experience and very successfully launched a new service there last week, and that investment is already showing we have 1,000 disputes on this new digital platform now, our new dispute resolution centre, and we're very confident, Deputy, that we will be able to continue to process disputes more efficiently, towards the end of this year. So we're very pleased that we have, made those service improvements.
Can I just briefly ask, and look, that's very welcome to hear from both of you, and thank you. Can I just ask, in terms of the increase in hearings, the increase in tribunals, is that a result of you getting to them sooner, or a result of increased number of disputes?
So the number of disputes is at a high.
It's
It's at a high. So the total number of disputes has been growing, and so we had, as I mentioned, 11,047 last year. That would have been the highest. It is continuing to trend upwards because of issues around the rental market that we would be well aware of. But the key thing is the processing times are, at the moment consistent with our SLA with the department. So we are trying to make sure that we provide a very good service to everybody involved, landlords, tenants, and third parties.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Chair.
All right, thanks very much, Deputy Owen Breen.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much for the presentation and also the engagement that you have with all of us outside of the meetings here. So a couple of quick questions. You mentioned 7 weeks turnaround time on average for mediations. Do you have the equivalent figures for adjudications and for tribunals, first of all?
Yes, I do. Would you like me to mention those? So the average time in 2024 to process an adjudication case was 17 weeks for applications received. That was just slightly above our target for 16 weeks. When I last checked the figures, Deputy, we were back within the 16 weeks, but it has gone up and down slightly month by month during the spring. But I am confident the new digital resource there, and that's the great work of the panel members that we have, hearing those very effectively, very quickly. The average time to process an adjudication case in 2023, was 23 weeks. So do you want me to go through?
So, just so I'm clear, the average time for adjudications was?
17 weeks.
And for tribunals?
Tribunals was 15 weeks for cases received and processed.
Yeah, perfect. And then I suppose the other question, just in the short time I have, is obviously the government has proposed some very significant changes to the Residential Tenancies Act in terms of security tenure provisions, definitions of landlords and the rent pressure zones. To what extent has the RTB been consulted on the detail of those? And with respect to the enforcement, because whatever one's view of them, they are quite complex, particularly the different definitions of landlords and the different security of tenure provisions. Are you satisfied, notwithstanding the fact, Owen, that you said you've got an increase in resources, that you will have sufficient resources to deal with what ultimately will be an even more complex regulatory landscape post that legislation, which we assume will be passed in the autumn and will be in place from March of next year?
Well, I think it's fair to say we are working closely with the department. When we got sight of the details, we've estimated and identified areas where we will need to do additional work and sussed out the implications for the RTB. And we've looked at what the resource requirement would be, and we have submitted that to the department, and that's being considered.
And would that have been after the kind of the publication of the details post cabinet, or would you have been involved prior to that?
So, Deputy, we have regular governance meetings with the department at which different aspects of the proposed regime were discussed. Not in detail, obviously, but we were asked to give comment in terms of, for example, implications around RPZs. But obviously the detail of what was proposed by government at that stage wouldn't have been shared. I do think it's important to note that I would support the fact that an all-island RPZ, or in this context, has made things simpler for people to understand, in that we had seen challenges where RPZs were not applied to certain counties, and we had talked about that at the quarterly updates, and my colleague Brian might comment a little bit more on that. So aspects of that related to the data that we were publishing on a quarterly basis was discussed with us. What we have discussed since the publication of the proposals is some of the critical resourcing issues that we may face, particularly around the need for us to deal with the notices of a termination, which are much more critical. So that is part of what the Chair referred to there in regard to the ongoing discussions. But, we were all clear, I think, as part of the quarterly updates, and Brian might want to comment, that the RPZ regime was showing some regional challenges, and that would have been discussed with the department at the quarterly governance updates. So Brian, you might...
I'm out of time, but I might come back to that in the next round. Thanks.
Deputy Joe Cooney.
Thank you, Chair, and again thank you for coming in today. An issue as regards payments and the way they're worked out. A landlord made that payment mid-May, which they were to do to the RTB. Early June got a reminder that the person wasn't registered. So they did make a phone call and the details couldn't be got. On the 21st, on the 14th of June, they got a final reminder to say the payment still wasn't made. So at that stage, they decided to write a second cheque and send it on, which they did do in fairness. So they did get on the 21st of June confirmation, yes, they have the payment got. After that, then they actually got a cheque back, which was over double of what it was. So it was €240 paid, plus €10. You can work that out. That was fine. That came back in the post. Couldn't understand it, the landlord. But by God, behold, lo and behold, on the 8th of July, got another letter saying that the person was not registered. So I don't know how that can work out or how that could be that situation. But the amount of time, effort, they had to go in between the landlord and the RTB with over and back and phone calls, and of the present day is still not sorted.
Yes. Well,
And that's gone on since early May.
So just on behalf of the RTB, I apologise for that, and that shouldn't have happened. I would like Louise maybe to comment on the detail of that in terms of just she's in charge of our customer service team. But we do, and we are aware of some issues around our registration system. And thank you for highlighting it. If you give us the details of that, we'll try and work through and make sure we understand exactly what happened. But I apologise that that had happened.
Thank you.
Louise
Thanks,
might just...
Rosemary. Thanks, Deputy. As Rosemary said, that's not an acceptable customer service experience for your constituent there. So I'm more than happy to take the details of it from you, and I can look into that directly and revert back to you directly on that matter, in order that we can try and understand what happened there. It does sound, that it's got quite messy quite quickly, that we should be able to unpack that and figure out what happened. I might just take the opportunity, though, if you don't mind, Deputy, just to mention that we have, in terms of our customer service statistics for last year, we have had a big reduction in the volume of calls and also emails and complaints, and that was largely to do with the attention that we paid to the registration system and resolving many of those issues for our customers, which is primarily landlords in that instance. So last year we received around 154,000 phone calls and around 208,000 emails, which was down 29% on the calls from 2023, and the volume of emails was down 32% from 2023. We also received a total of 321 complaints from customers in 2024, which was a reduction of 53% from 678 in 2023, which is a reflection of the work that had been done. But clearly there are some examples, as you've just given us, where things are not as they should be, and we do need to look into that. In addition, we also responded to 265 email queries from members of the Oireachtas in 2024, which was down by 45% in 2023. And just finally on that matter, in terms of our latest data on calls up to May of this year, registration queries, which would include your constituent deputy, was around 1,600 calls, which was around 30% of calls. So you can see it does still represent a good bit there. So we do have some more work to do, absolutely, and I'm more than happy to take the details of that specific case, Deputy.
Okay, thank you very much for the reply. But again, it is inconvenient putting both on the RTB and on the landlord, which is not good enough.
No, it's not a good use of public funds, and it's not good
advertisement.
service for the landlord. Absolutely, we totally accept that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Deputy Roy Hearn.
Great, thank you. And thanks for coming forward today. I suppose, just in terms of the resourcing, again, to emphasise that question, and I understand that you're probably... in terms of how you respond to this, it's a difficult question because we don't know. But given the complexity of the new measures that have been introduced, do you expect that there will be an increase in disputes as a result of that? And maybe you could just give us some sense of your expectation, or have you done analysis of the work required to respond to that? The other issue then is, could you give a comment on, because we just had landlord organisations in relation to this gap between the number of registered landlords and what the census showed a significantly higher number of landlords. And I know you've done some work on that, but do you still think that there is a problem of landlords not registering, and what scale of that problem do you think is there? The last issue is in relation to rent arrears. Given that the analysis is there very clearly that rents are going to increase as a result of these measures, new measures, I was looking at the figures there, and disputes relating to rent arrears was about 403. I think it was in the region of 500 in 2020, 2021. It's now up to 625 in Q1 2020-25. Do you see that issue, the issue of rent arrears, increasing? Do you have any sense of the pressure that renters are under in terms of affordability and rents? Thank you.
I mean, there's three issues there. So I think on the issue of a failure to register all landlords, I think I'll ask Brian to give our perspective on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're probably aware last year the CSO undertook an analysis where they compared the census data to our data. They identified a difference of about 73,000 that they found on the census that were not in RTB data. They looked at the characteristics of RTB tenancies and they compared it to the 73,000, and from that they identified about 25,000 that had the same characteristics as RTB tenancies. And off the back of that work, the RTB has undertaken targeted campaigns, specifically in the counties that have showed the highest possibly unregistered tenancies. I don't know if Rosemary wants to talk a little bit more about the campaigns that were undertaken.
Yeah, no, so I think as the Deputy might be aware, there were certain counties that we saw that there was clearly compliance issues, and most recently we visited Galway actually to do an event there to talk to all the stakeholders to ensure that we tackle registration, and we intend returning there in the autumn to do a dedicated kind of push around registration in the Galway market, particularly where we can see that the increases in rent are above the national average also, thanks to the statistics that my colleague has done. So what I could, if that's okay, what I might do is then address your issue around the resourcing for the new...
So would you have an estimate in terms of what numbers of landlords do you think are still unregistered out of that 25,000?
I think when we looked at it, we were approximately 8,000 that we thought was the approximate figure. And what we've done is try to break that down by county, Deputy, and that's why we're targeting Galway in particular as a large block of that. We have limited resources, so we have to target the area that we feel is going to deliver most. So we did drive a very substantial national communication around the situation in the Galway market, which was well received by the stakeholders in Galway when we met them, and there's an acknowledgement that there needs to be more work done in that community to get out what is required from a landlord and tenant perspective. So you'll see more from us, you'll see more activity from us on that. I'm very clear in my view on that.
Yeah, just the rent question then,
So the rent or the resourcing? Would you like me to start with the resourcing?
Both if you can. I'm very conscious of the time, Chair, as well.
Both linked. So some of the critical resourcing and regulatory issues that we did highlight, as I mentioned in my response to the earlier question, was the need possibly to look at our tenant registration system and potentially whether we need a new tenant registration system post March because of the proposed changes. Some of the changes, as you're aware, like landlord size, previous rental market history and details of the last notice of termination served, we mightn't have full details of that on our current system. So there's a question arising for us about upping our capabilities around that, and that's something myself and the Chair have been very engaged with our board and the department around. We also need a new team within the RTB, we believe, to verify and monitor notices of terminations due to the new rule on no-fault evictions and the resetting to market rent. So we normally, at the moment, manage that through our early intervention team. It comes in as part of the disputes process. While we receive NOTs, we wouldn't authenticate each one. We would note them as part of the statistical reporting, so that's going to require more work. And then we obviously have also mentioned the need for increased resourcing of our compliance and enforcement team. We currently have 8 investigators to enforce rental law across the entire country, and we need obviously to look at that in terms of the resourcing levels for the new regime. So if that's just a snapshot of the situation, Chair.
All right, thank you. We might get back to finishing it just when I said Senator Aubrey McCarthy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here today. Just from your statement and your report, it shows that you've confirmed that even with the high compliance on rent controls, the average new rents have risen by 5.5%. So it shows that regulation alone is not can't fix the underlying supply shortage. So I'm just wondering, what's your view on that? That's one question. And secondly, the RTB, you've said that the large landlords are consolidating. In other words, there's 100 plus tenancies, it seems to be, rather than smaller landlords. They seem to be exiting. So the current regulations and the tax environment seem to drive that consolidation, I think, and therefore it seems to make it unviable for smaller landlords. And then lastly, I received 2 emails from landlords in the last while, and they asked my office to intervene. And they had one tenant, each had a tenant. One tenant had never moved into the apartment, and they were there for 2 years. And the tenancy was there for 2 years, and they were on HAP. Then the second had rented out; they'd sublet. So my office rang HAP. And they said there's nothing they could do. And then my office was recommended to ring the RTB, and they were saying, well, no law's been broken. So my fear is, I'm involved in the homeless sector. You have 2 units of housing there that are not being used, and yet there's nothing wrong being done. Is that something you come across? Thank you.
So I think it might be helpful if Brian commented just on the overall situation around the landlords. I think certainly that is an area in which we've spent a lot of time doing some research. So
Yeah,
Brian.
so since the introduction of our new tenancy management system and annual registration, it gives us the power to understand what's happening with the landlords in greater detail. Landlords are verified at the point of registration via their PPSN. So we know exactly who the landlords are. If they're a company, we know exactly who they are via their CRO numbers. Over the last year, we've seen the number of private landlords associated with registered tenancies increase by just over 1%, 1.5% I think it is, to 104,000. And the majority of them are landlords that have just one tenancy. So 66% of all registered landlords have just one tenancy. And that cohort of landlords provide about 25% of tenancies in the country. So while they make up the majority of landlords, they provide about 25% of tenancies. At the other end of the scale, you talked about larger landlords. There's only just, I think, 121 or so large landlords with over 100 plus tenancies. And they provide at a national level about 13.5% of all tenancies. In Dublin, it's a very different picture as well. Larger landlords provide 27% and smaller landlords provide a smaller proportion. So different parts of the country, there's different size landlords providing the units, and that has been changing significantly since our data series began, which is running from Q2 2023. We've seen the proportion of tenancies provided by these large landlords increase significantly over that time from 9.5% up to 13.5%. But predominantly that's been driven by new builds in Dublin.
So the smaller landlords are leaving?
Well, we've always seen landlords enter and exit the sector, and throughout this data series since it began in Q2 2023, we've seen the number of small landlords actually increase every single quarter except the most recent quarter, where we did see a small decline overall in the number of landlords that fell by 1%, and that 1% fall is really in the landlords that have one tenancy. So that's where, but you will always have landlords entering and exiting the sector just because of the nature of smaller landlords in Ireland.
So we will be providing an update on that on, I think it's the 11th of September, which is our next quarterly release of data, and that will deal with that matter. Would you like me to deal with your first question?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So just, I suppose from I think on behalf of the RTB chair, we would agree that supply is a continuing issue in the market. So, there's no doubt that every unit is of value in a potential home. So it's our role as the regulator to make sure that the services we operate are as efficient as possible to ensure that those disputes are resolved. It's important that I say that the vast majority of landlords and tenants never end up in dispute. So, we see that there's only really, 11,000 cases out of what is in total, say, 300,000 tenancies, so it's a very small percentage that end up in dispute. Where we see successful engagement with mediation, because both the tenant and landlord agree to that, that's why in the new system we have adopted a mediation first approach. So like the issue that you're discussing, if you could get the parties to engage around mediation, that matter could be resolved within 7 weeks.
But there is no issues, that's the point. The rent is being paid, HAP is paying the rent, so therefore it hasn't. But the landlord was fearing that he's getting paid,
right,
and he's going to get into trouble. So contacted HAP, they said no, there's nothing on you, and then contacted RTB. So everybody's happy, but I'm saying 2 units of housing have been squandered, and that's where.
Well, once they're registered, and that's the issue, that everybody's there in compliance. But I wouldn't want to see units left in any way.
I'm wondering, is it a bigger issue?
Move on to
Sorry.
a second round of questions again. Deputy Chairman McGrath, 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mayor. I suppose just picking up on the trend there in terms of tenancies, and I know from your opening statement, overall there's been a 4.6% increase in the first quarter, which I suppose is contrary to a lot of the commentary we hear around landlords getting out and so on. But it is fair to say that disproportionately new tenancies will be on the larger landlord side, I would think, than the smaller landlord. So there is an issue with smaller landlords. Would you agree with that sentiment? Briefly, if you can.
Yeah, you're correct. The proportion of tenancies being provided by these larger landlords is increasing, and the proportion of tenancies being provided by the smaller landlords is decreasing. And I suppose it's most evident in Dublin, where you would see the largest volume of tenancies being provided by these large landlords. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask you, in terms of unregistered tenancies, landlords that effectively are operating in the black market, to what extent do you think that is an issue across the country?
Well, this was just, again, about the CSO analysis that was undertaken last year. You know, it did identify that there's 25,000 tenancy, or 25,000 units that possibly should have been registered that were not registered. And, you know, since then we have undertaken a campaign on that. So.
You see that number reducing as a result of your campaign?
I do indeed. I think Rosemary just mentioned a few minutes ago that, you know, as a result of that, we have seen a reduction.
And that 25,000, is it fair to say they're also not paying tax on their rental income? Or would you be able to pick up on?
So the analysis was undertaken by the CSO. So in terms of like row level information, we were not provided with that back. So I can't make an assessment on that.
I suppose what I'm asking is, if someone is paying tax on their rental income, is there a way for you to pick up on that tenancy?
But we are looking, we're due to get power for data sharing with the revenue commissioners.
Okay.
And that will assist us. We already share data with local authorities, other public bodies, but access to revenue commissioners' data will certainly assist us in targeting our campaigns to ensure compliance with registration requirements.
So that's not there right now in terms of a link up between revenue and yourselves?
So that was part of the new legislation that was required, and we are in continued discussions with the department about that. However, revenue do work with us. For example, at the seminar that I mentioned in Galway, revenue attended and are engaging with local stakeholders there. So where we can, in specific cases, engage with them, we do, but not where we formally have to share data.
Just to be clear on that, we can share our data with revenue, but as of now, revenue can't share data with us. So we need to address that.
Landlord who isn't registered with you but maybe paying tax isn't someone you can pick up with. Just very briefly, final question if I can. Look, this is a blunt question, but it goes back to my earlier question in terms of disputes and so on and how long they take. If I'm a landlord and my tenant stops paying rent today and I make a complaint to yourselves, what is your estimated time frame for dealing with that and basically getting the landlord back their house? Because these are the complaints landlords make in terms of, you know, delays and disputes and resolution and so on like that. So if that presents to you today, how long would you estimate that there would be a final conclusion on a complaint of that nature?
2 weeks.
Yeah, Deputy, so there's this. If the landlord chooses to pursue it through mediation, it would be within the 7 weeks, or if they choose to go the adjudication route, it's the 13 weeks. The process that you're alluding to in terms of actually the landlord having the property, you know, having vacant possession of the property, if the tenant does not leave, following the conclusion of the RTB process, then the landlord would have to pursue that matter further through the district court. I would also like just to mention, though, that as part of the improvements that we've been making to our dispute services, we now have an early intervention service. So that landlord in that situation could talk to one of our own in-house early intervention team, and they could take that landlord through the process. It's actually quite an effective mechanism. It's one we've introduced for a few months now. We will have more updates later in the year, but effectively what happens is our own staff will contact the other party directly with a view to try to resolve it. So it's kind of obviating the need to go through a whole quasi-judicial process. It's actually to try and get parties talking via an RTB official to resolve the matter.
Okay. It's an early stage
early intervention
negotiation attempt.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Yeah, good morning. I suppose just looking at page 9 of the report there, where there were 4,693 terminations to quit received in Q1 2025. For Cork City, where I'm a TD from, there were 591 notices to quit received in the first quarter of 2025. Like, how many of these will actually result in evictions and either people becoming homelessness or entering emergency accommodation? And when do you expect the Q2 figures to be out?
So just in relation to the Q2 figures, we're currently analysing the data at the moment, and they will be published on the 11th of September as our next quarterly update. We don't currently do a cross-analysis with homeless data. We just analyse the data that comes in and provide a county level breakdown and the reasons for the NOTs themselves.
I think it's important to understand that landlords are required to issue notice of termination in every case where they terminate a tenancy, but in many cases there will be no dispute. They will have agreed with the tenant, but they have to issue the notice because that's the procedure, and they have to send us with a copy. So it doesn't necessarily lead into a dispute.
We don't know.
We don't. Well, we know the number of disputes we have related to, say, rent arrears or whatever, but and it is very, very low. I would.
We don't know how many of those evictions, because that's what a notice to quit is like. It's called a spade a spade. You get a notice to quit for the people I'm dealing with as evictions all over.
But it's not necessarily. I mean, they could voluntarily exit the property. Could
yeah,
be
they voluntary exit, and
yeah.
they go into homeless emergency accommodation, or they end up going into their mother's box bedroom. You know, so that's homeless by another name. Like, I would like to see collect more data, because I think the data you are collecting is really good, you know, and when you're looking at making government policy, the more accurate, up-to-date data, the better. One of the other things I would like to see is a major ramping up of the Residential Tenancy Board in relation to, I believe all local authorities should come on their remit. We have local authorities now who are treating their tenants in a disgraceful way, leaving them in mouldy, damp houses with leaks in their roofs, windows that are freezing cold. Like, there's areas now where the council won't carry out the work until the tenant leaves or dies, right? And then they'll go in, they'll retrofit the house. But then the person who's living next door to them is living in freezing cold because the government won't provide the funding to retrofit enough houses. So, like, I suppose from my point of view is, would you be in favour of taking over, I suppose, supervision of local authorities that show that their tenants have the same right as private tenants?
I mean, we're aware of the fact that was a recommendation of the Housing Commission, but ultimately that's a matter for government and for legislation. We will enforce rental law, you know, that we're asked to enforce, and at the moment local authority tenants are not subject to the RTB, but that's not the matter for the RTB. And I don't think it's really appropriate for us as a regulator to comment on specific policy
and that's fair enough. From my point of view, I think it's a double standard that local authority tenants haven't got the same protections as private tenants. To me, that's not fair. And just in relation to inspections that you carried out, I remember when you were here last year, we discussed, was it 100 inspections a year? These are inspections that you just take on yourself without complaints coming in. How many figures were carried out in 2024? Because I felt at the time there should be a lot more inspections carried out.
Yeah, Deputy, I can take that part. So I suppose it's important to understand that there are a number of different compliance pathways that the RTB has. So we have a civil process under Part 7A of the Residential Tenancies Act, which is often referred to as investigations and sanctions. The RTB can investigate landlords for 10 defined breaches of rental law, which can result in a civil sanction of up to €15,000 and costs of up to €15,000 for each breach of rental law. We also have a criminal process for registration enforcement under section 144 of our legislation, whereby we can prosecute landlords for failing to register a tenancy, which can result in a fine of up to €4,000. Last year, we also completed a compliance intervention pilot to support landlords to rectify low-risk minor breaches of rental law before escalating their case for investigation and sanction. Just in relation to your investigations there, Deputy, in 2024, we did focus a significant amount of our resources, and as the Director said, we have 8 investigators for the state on investigations into high-risk offenders that led to higher levels of sanction than previously seen. So in total, we published 75 confirmed sanctions in 2024, with almost 250,000 euros in sanctions paid by landlords, which was a significant increase on the approximately 64,000 in monetary sanctions paid in 2023. I'd also like to note that since 2019, landlords have paid some 370,000 euros in sanctions, and our investigations have returned 4,670,000 euros in overpaid rent to tenants.
Listen, thanks very much. Apologies, Chair. I have to run to the chamber. I'll be back and hopefully I'll get another opportunity.
Deputy Joe Cooney, 3 minutes.
We have a landlord give notice to the tenants to quit, and proper notice all done within the law, and unfortunately maybe the tenants might have nowhere to go or don't want to quit. What's the situation there?
Well, the reality is that that's all too frequent, where it ends up as a dispute, not because there's a fundamental dispute, because the tenant genuinely has difficulty accessing alternative accommodation and they overstay in the property, and so it has to be resolved through our dispute mechanism. So, I mean, that unfortunately does happen.
And could you not get involved with the tenants? And I know to look at homeless and everything is a tough situation, but there's a PCC dispute going on between maybe genuine landlords and genuine tenants, and they've nowhere to go. Could there be not some sort of a solution got between yourselves and the local authority and the tenants in the house if the landlord, because I've seen disputes and this thing you've seen maybe locks been changed or whatever, and you don't want to see that happening. But you should have ways of solving the problem and a solution to it.
So we do find, Deputy, particularly with the AHB sector, that there are issues about rent arrears, and that is something that I have spoken to the sector about myself in terms of working closely with MABs early in disputes and using mediation rather than adjudication as a potential solution, so that a pathway forward for the tenant can be found. And we do find that if the parties agree to mediation, that there are very helpful discussions that happen and resolution can be found. So it's not the case necessarily that all of these situations end. It's sometimes, a workable solution for the tenant emerges. But we have asked, in particular, the AHB sector to prioritise using mediation rather than moving straight to adjudication, particularly where vulnerable tenants are involved. And I have discussed that also with the regulator for the AHBs in terms of some of my concerns about the sector.
Yeah, but maybe there's no rent arrears, maybe there's no issues. The landlord just wants his house back.
Yeah.
That's where the bigger problem actually comes in, yeah.
And that is an issue around supply in the market. What we have to do is try and support both parties reach an agreement as fairly and quickly and reasonably as possible, because otherwise it becomes, if you like, too challenging for both of them. I have, as director, since I started last September, Deputy, prioritised overholding or rent withholding in terms of dispute categories. So we do move them quickly into early intervention, because we find that where we get those parties engaged early, that more helpfully ends up in a situation that everybody is, while it's not desirable, a more workable outcome for all parties. And that would be one of the things that I would like deputies to continue to highlight to people coming onto their offices. Mediation resource at the RTB, it's free, it's a very valuable service, and where both parties agree to something, it can bring an end to some of these very difficult situations very quickly. So, and I think our mediation panel have shown their value in that case. So, everybody does recognise it's difficult, and I have huge sympathy for those that are impacted in those disputes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Just maybe to come back on the question of, I suppose, the implications and impacts of rising rents on and the recent changes that are likely to see rising rents and the complicated issues around that. In terms of the disputes, do you reckon there's going to be a greater level of disputes in terms of rent arrears? Also, do you gather data on what we might consider the affordability of rent, or renters facing those challenges? And if you don't, would you consider doing that? I think it would be very useful data to have. And then in relation to the issue of the standards in rental properties, again, to just, we know there's a massive problem in terms of standards of rental properties. Do you see yourself undertaking any initiatives on that? Do you accept that there's a big problem in standards? And finally, you issued you said in terms of a breach on company landlords. Could you maybe identify what those breaches were in relation to? Thanks.
No problem, Deputy Chair. Would you like me to?
There's a number of issues there. Just The issue of standards in rental property, I think it's important to emphasise that local authorities are the primary enforcement agency when it comes to compliance with the rental standards. It would only come to our attention if somebody, if there's a dispute in relation to it, or if we get a complaint. But the primary enforcement responsibility lies with local authorities.
Do you think that enforcement is sufficient?
Do I think well, I don't have a view on it really, but I think it's not something that, we don't have environmental health officers whose job it is to inspect, to check, but that's the way the situation is at the moment. Some of those cases do come through our system if there's a formal dispute, or if there's an issue of general compliance that we're dealing with. So we can deal with some of the other issues you raised there. But
yeah,
thanks.
I think in terms of disputes, when I started as director, I was very clear that I wanted to prioritise that area within the regulatory body for action. Not just related to the changes that are now happening. The RTB has always had to deal with changes in regulatory regimes or in legislation. We were talking about it this morning, so we're in our 20th year now. So we've had significant experience in terms of just adapting to different things that have happened. So basically, I was very clear that disputes was a critical issue. And that was why we drove investment in the new platform that we launched last week, Deputy. And that was also to protect everybody in the context of further changes and disputes that will happen as a result of pressures around the market. And I am really happy that we made that decision. We did deprioritise investment in other parts of the business to do that. And I think it was the right thing to do based on the feedback that we've had from the stakeholders. We had 26 stakeholders at clinics last week and yesterday just giving feedback on that new system. And I think the community is very happy that that's there and now in place, and everybody will be able to access it in the context of whatever changes lie ahead. So, it is clear that the challenges around the market are going to remain over the next year, and we have to be in a position to allow to service all of those disputes as quickly as possible.
And just in that rent and affordability, do you do any analysis of that? Would you see yourselves doing analysis of that?
I haven't personally been involved in that, but I might ask Brian to just comment on that.
We did undertake surveys with tenants. We published them in 2021 and again in December 2023. It was a nationally representative survey of 1,200 tenants around the country, and there is details about affordability within the surveys. I don't have it with me, but I'm happy to share it with you.
And are you planning to do another one soon?
We are looking into undertaking additional surveys using the same methodological approach, yes.
Okay, I think it'd be very useful to have that data if you consider incorporating it into the reports in some way to try and measure that, the impact particularly on the rents and their level.
Yeah, look, as part of the submissions that we're making to the Department Deputy, we really want to invest more in our research, and I very much welcome comments from members about how useful members find our data. I think it is critical in terms of the changes facing the sector that we continue to be at the forefront of providing that data to briefings such as here and to stakeholders. It's really, really important. That brings into sharp focus in my mind the registration system and the upgrade that we need to make to collect more data, and how do we manage that. Part of the decision that I made as director was to stand up the system that is operating now on disputes on a different platform to make that more accessible and to have more of a customer service focus. And we do have to discuss with government whether we now want to do that around the registration system so that we can collect more data. You raised the issue also just in regard to standards, and again that's part of the challenges, and that was debated I think in the Housing Commission report around the rent register and the data that would be required to stand up a rent register. We do want to be able to we do want to be able to collect that as part of then systemically supporting the sector evolve.
Yeah, sure. First of all, just to say, often in these sessions we kind of focus on perceived problems or challenges. It is much better that we have a residential tenancies board than we don't have one. And I just think it's important that people hear that. Many other jurisdictions still have only one recourse for dispute resolution, which is the courts, which is expensive and time consuming. And while often we will focus on delays, again, some of the data you've given us in terms of the processing of disputes, I think is very positive. I would welcome another round of both tenant and landlord sentiment surveys. They're really, really useful. Right? They're some of the best data we get. And I appreciate it takes time and resourcing. what I would suggest is if you are considering doing that, it would be good to write to our committee and even ask us or invite us to say, there are things we think would be useful to know. Do you know what I mean? Just to throw in, because the question I have is, we still don't have an accurate picture of the flow of landlords and rental tenancies through the system, right? We know the number of registrations, new and annual. We know the number of notices of termination, but actually kind of understanding the net change, how many are leaving, how many are coming in. I think if we could get to a position where we had a handle on that, it would give us some really important information for framing policy. So I suppose it may be, Brian, a question for you or Louise, but from the data you have in front of you, do you have any observations on, where the rental sector is? My own sense of it is it's still contracting, not as at a sharp rate as some people previously thought, but that the total number is fewer than it was some numbers of years ago. But do you have an observation or thoughts on where that's at and what the net flow is between new landlords coming in and sitting landlords going out?
Right. Yes, so we looking at the net flow, I don't have a figure for you on the numbers coming in and coming out. What we do publish is a point-in-time figure of the overall number of tenancies. I am, with the advancements of our system and, hopeful future advancements as well, hope to be able to get to a point that we will be able to monitor that in more detail. We do obviously know the number of NOTs that we receive, which does give us some insight in the number of tenancies that are ending. It also gives us insight into the numbers of landlords that are selling the properties. But we do also see, other than private tenancies, you see AHB tenancies, and that sector is growing. So it's great that we have the data set that's tracking that to see the consistent growth in that sector as well. So just to mention that.
And just on that, the other question, I know Rory did ask this earlier, is there any intention to do a follow-up piece of work with the CSO just on that gap between, because obviously there was a very good piece of work that yourselves and the CSO did, but the situation has moved on quite somewhat since then, to try and get a sense of whether that gap has narrowed or grown between, the 2022 CSO data and then your current registration data.
The basis of that was the census data.
Yeah.
So it would make sense after the next census,
yeah,
I think, to repeat that exercise. But in the absence of a census, I'm not sure we'd have...
What I think could be done is, because I presume you have some level of granular detail that we're able to identify the 47,000 properties or whatever it was initially, right, and the two categories that they were divided into. If there was any way of doing a look back on those. Now, again, I know there's a limit to what data you can access from the CSO data set, but even to establish what happened with those 47, did some end up registering, did some not, where did they go? Owen, you're completely correct. I think this next census is the time to do the repeat exercise, but that's quite a way away.
Am I right? I don't think the CSO were allowed to identify the actual properties to us. So
they weren't allowed to you, but
no.
But that, I presume they must be able to do some analysis themselves and then aggregate that in a way that's GDPR compliant.
What we were able to obtain from that deputy was the identify the 7 counties with the highest levels of non-compliance that we spoke about earlier, and we have been targeting those counties with the local authorities, and we have undertaken communication campaigns, local media, local radio, there to drive that. And we've also the ESRI, individual property level analysis that my colleague Brian spoke about earlier. We also identified a number of tenancies out of that as well, and we followed up with those, including spot checking 1,000 landlords, and we're still following up on all of that activity, and there'll be more updates later in the year. So I think we've quite a lot from the property level analysis really has helped drive quite a lot of activity in the compliance space, and that's where we'll keep probably pursuing it.
Perfect. Thanks, Chair.
I'm just going to ask a couple of questions myself. I'm not going to, I suppose I've been listening in, and to be honest, I remember 10 years ago we had an issue at home with a very poor service in RTB. Very, very poor, I'll be honest. Things have changed, and that was down to the resourcing of the organisation, and a lot of improvements have been made since. But I'm picking up very, very strongly, you're still under-resourced for what needs to be done in the future. And I suppose I'd ask you maybe to, and you have some in your open statement, highlight the top 3, what you need as an organisation to represent tenancies, landlords, and to get it right. Because there's a number of things mentioned. We mentioned about the fact that there's roughly 25,000 unregistered. And there's a significant loss, I'd say, that a taxpayer, the fact that they're not registered, because of a significant percentage of them wouldn't be paying income tax on that. But ultimately, with changes that have been, new rules, etc., and changes, what exactly do you need in the next month to be able to say we have a fully resourced RTB that can effectively deliver, what is needed with all these new changes? That's, yeah.
So the national RPZ is a huge, compliance task. We have currently 8 investigators, Chair, to manage the whole country. So we have raised issues around wanting to increase staffing in that area to be able to drive investigations. Last month we announced the largest fine ever made by the RTB against a landlord. It was mentioned briefly by Deputy in one of his queries there. We need to be able to fine and sanction landlords appropriately. We also have to be able to, if you like, give the data that's required back to policymakers quickly on what's happening around the sector. So resourcing for compliance, resourcing for research and analysis that has been raised by deputies is very important. And the final piece, the Chair is just saying to me here as well, and I agree, is IT. Because when you look at where we are now from where we were a year ago, a huge amount of positive things have happened. The dispute system is really state of the art, I believe, at this stage in terms of public services, and hopefully will perform a really valuable role in the new regime. I think we need to make sure that we look at the registration system now quickly. We want to make it user-friendly. We don't want some of the issues that were mentioned by your colleagues earlier. So I need to drive an investment into that system by government. I believe that we've successfully shown we can manage an IT project within a budget. It's been delivered to the budget. And we are very, the team is very proud of the work that's been done to do that. And we would like more investment because we believe that customers will benefit from that, and also the market as a whole will become more confident in the services that the RTB is providing. So it's those 3 things, if that's okay, Chair.
And what feedback are you getting?
So we have a very positive relationship with the department. I see them regularly, obviously, and I know the Chair does too. I mean, they understand and know the RTB much better than I do. I've only been there for 10 months, Chair, but there's a good understanding that the RTB needs investment, and I think that's accepted by all parties involved.
And just to highlight that at 6:30 this evening we have the Select Committee dealing with estimates of the Minister for Housing. So I'm sure that point will be.
Well, I think the Chair has engaged with the Minister.
We have been speaking to the Minister on this, and I think he certainly recognised the need. And now I'm very conscious we're in an estimates process, and it may not be entirely in the Minister's gift at this stage, but we're very hopeful that we'll certainly get additional resources, and we're very hopeful that we'll get a resource on the scale that we require.
All right, thank you. And I'm going to let in one more member because there's 2 Fianna Fáil slots that have been used. Deputy McGrath, do you want to go in the last question?
Look, I know we're cut for time. Just very briefly, I suppose to pick up on that issue of resources again, I did ask at the outset. I think it's critically important that there would be additional resources, because it is an issue in terms of landlords staying in the rental market, that you are properly resourced, and equally from a tenant's point of view that you are properly resourced. So certainly we'd be trying to support that as best we can, I'm sure, from a committee point of view. In terms of a final question, I just want to, in terms of, look, there are rogue people in every walk of life. There are rogue landlords. There are rogue tenants. What is the typical sanction, I suppose, that is given to rogue landlords? Is it fines, and to what extent does that happen? And equally, in the case of tenants who are found not to be in compliance with the rental agreement, what are typically the sanctions on a tenant, if any? If you could comment on that, thanks.
Deputy, we have a lot of detail in the quarterly publication we gave you at the start, and it does detail some of the sanctions, and we do publish them on our website as well. We have been working towards you know, looking at the level of sanctions, as I mentioned earlier, the overall volume of sanctions that has been imposed has increased significantly in 2024 over 23. We have also been driving a lot of activity at rogue landlords, and we did publish quite a bit on that recently, and there was an interview with a couple of our colleagues in the Irish Times a couple of weeks ago on that specific issue about the level, the intricate detail that is required to pursue landlords who are deliberately evading regulation, and they're often deliberately evading regulation by the RTB and by other regulators, including revenue and elsewhere. We have a range of investigations ongoing at present in that space, of which more details will be published when we can publish them. It's just to note that tenants themselves are not regulated in the same way as landlords in that respect. So it would be through the disputes process. If there are rent arrears, then generally speaking, the determination order would be for the amount of rent arrears, and then potentially if there's other breach of the tenant's obligations. But the regulatory compliance role of the RTB is around landlords.
Yeah. All right, no, thank you. Thanks, everybody. I just want to thank the representatives from the RTB at the round glasses, Brian, Louise, Rosemary, and Owen for coming here and answering, I'd say, a strong field of questions. Maybe at a later stage in the autumn or maybe in the spring, we might invite you back in again, hopefully following additional resources being put in place for further organisation.
Suggesting for yourself, if we knew when, for example, the quarterly reports were coming out in advance, we might be able to schedule a meeting to coincide with that, right? Which means you get a public airing of it to just, I mean, that's...
11th of September?
I think we have published, if that helps Deputy and Chair, we have published the dates. We're happy to share them. We could write to you with those.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, that concludes our consideration on the matter today. I now propose that the committee adjourns until 6 p.m. when the committee will meet with Minister James Brown to consider the Planning and Development Regulations 2025 Act in Committee Room 2. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.